Listen to me, you piece of The tip is 10%. No, it is 20%. And you will pay it, whether you like it or not, because I need to make more money. I will do everything you say, please don't be mean to me.
Hi guys, this is me, Valerie and Vatsov behind the camera. We are licensed Prague guides and locals. Last one is hardly an achievement. We wait for a red tram and go to the post office, but we wanted to emphasize it here because today we're gonna talk about a very controversial topic, and that's tipping. Tipping can prove to be a challenge in the Czech Republic. When you ask the internet how much to tip in the Czech Republic, you generally get three answers. You need to tip 10%. No, you don't need to tip at all. Just round it up and give them a little bit. First, let's answer the most basic question. Is tipping even a thing in the Czech Republic? The short answer is yes, it is very much in the Czech culture. However, 20% of the Czech population doesn't tip at all, but the majority of people tips. Obviously, tipping is not obligatory. It is a token of appreciation for good service. So if your waiter was nice to you and you liked everything, you should leave them a tip. But if they were rude, dismissive, forgetful, you shouldn't reward this kind of behavior with a tip. Unless you're into that.
Can I please pay?
Let's move on to a more complicated topic. How much should you tip in the Czech Republic? As we've established, around 20% of the Czech Republic's population doesn't tip at all. But what about the rest? Camp number one, we will call them round-uppers, tips 5% on the average. And the second one gives generous 10%. That makes an average tip in the Czech Republic about 6%. And according to this map, in Prague, it's about 6.3%. It is hard to tell why people tip 5% or 10%, because every tip is subjective. You're supposed to evaluate what kind of service you received and then tip based on that. One of the most common arguments that I've heard in the defense of giving less tips was that waiters here already receive wages, so there's no need to give them more money, because their employer already pays them well enough. Anyone who worked as a server knows that tips are often a big incentive for the job. Your employer might tell you that, yes, your wage is not so high, but tips will for sure make up for it. However, there is a problem with it nowadays, at least in the Czech Republic. People are leaving less tips. That could be attributed to a peculiar state of economy, but there is another thing that contributes to people leaving less tips, and that's cashless payments. Let me explain. In the past, after you finish your meal, the waiter would bring you a little folder with a receipt. You would put the money there and then leave a little bit extra to the waiter. But nowadays it is kind of screwed up, because what happens is that the waiter comes to your table with a terminal, and then the waiter would have to ask you if you want to leave them a tip. But sometimes they don't, because they find it too pushy, so they end up saying nothing. They print you a receipt and then the customer says, "Can I leave you a tip?" But that's too late already. Ideally, if you want to leave a tip when you pay by card, you have to tell your waiter beforehand so they can punch it in the terminal and add however much you want to leave them. Most customers don't know about it, and then the waiter can't add a tip afterwards. That leads to the quality of the service tanking.
So, as you can see, there's no tip included in your bill. Most polite people leave tips. It should be around 10%, but if you really liked my service, it should be 20. Of course, you can leave less, but only losers do that, and maybe kids. It's up to you to decide.
And then pushes the restaurant owners to come up with solutions for this problem. And often they're not the best. They include 10 to 15% suggested tip. So what happens is that you go to a restaurant and then the waiter brings you a receipt and asks you, is that okay if we included a tip into this bill already? That happened to us in two places in Prague, and that's a fancy cafe Imperial and the popular rooftop terrace Uprince. From what we've researched, a suggested tip isn't illegal, as long as the staff informed you about it in advance. It is not obligatory and you can refuse to pay it. However, if no one told you about it and they just sneakily added it to your bill, then it's not okay. The restaurant can't force you to tip. What also has been happening recently is the so-called tipflation, when you're being asked to tip at a store, a self-service place, or just when you're picking up your order. I'd say it's still pretty rare in Prague. Happened to me only once at the Two Roosters when we were ordering a meal on those self-service touchscreens. But if you have encountered a tip creep anywhere else in Prague, let us know in the comments. To sum it up, tipping in Prague is not obligatory, but it is part of the Czech restaurant etiquette. If you enjoyed the service, you should leave 7 to 10%. If you liked the service a little bit less, you can leave 5 or less percent, or just round up your bill. And if you didn't like anything, you don't have to leave them a tip. That should motivate them to do a better job after all. And just one last thing before we part with you guys. A lot of tourists who travel here are confused by these 3 letters that they find in their receipt. They think it's a scam or some kind of additional charge that the restaurant decided to put there last minute to rip them off, but it is not a scam. These 3 letters stand for the tax. So don't freak out if you receive a bill and you see these 3 letters there. They're not trying to fool you or scam you.